So I'd just like to start with an acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Gadigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their continual care for country, and thank our elders for all that they've done in the past. As you know, the saying goes, we stand on the shoulder of giants, so they've done a lot for us in the past, and hopefully moving forward we'll show that respect and move forward. So I'd just like to thank Kate. Kate Constantine is here to give a lecture or talk today on her amazing artwork and so forth. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'm going to sit at the door for my four-legged friend who's creating quite a bit of havoc this morning. So I apologise if she gets a little bit excited. But thanks for coming, Kate.
My name's Kate Constantine. I am a visual artist. I paint under the moniker Konstantina with a K. And there's a whole big story about that. In having a yarn with Lisa last week about doing this talk today here, I was thinking, you know, what should I talk to you guys about? You know, the theme for this year is, you know, for our elders, which is something that I think as Aboriginal people we all really connect with. So today I'm gonna start with telling you my story and how my elders have influenced how I'm here today. So I've written some notes. I'll start now. I'm a concrete Koori. I'm from the big, bustling urban metropolis known as the City of Sydney. I'm a proud Gadigal woman. I'm a mother and I'm a neo-contemporary, digital and multidisciplinary artist. I'm from the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is made up of 29 clan groups and is bound by the three mighty rivers: the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and the Georges River to the south. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge my Gadigal elders of the Eora Nation. By name, Uncle Ray, Uncle Alan, Uncle Chika, and Uncle Charles. These men are formidable. They are Gadigal, they are gentle, also starts with a G. They are genteel, also starts with a G. They are often consumed by the politics of the City of Sydney. And today, on this NAIDOC day, on this NAIDOC week, where we are expressing our love, gratitude and respect for our elders, I'd like to call them out as those people that we love, cherish for their wisdom and respect. We all have a role to play as custodians of country, and acknowledgements go far deeper than simply words. They serve as an active reminder to do more to engage with your local Aboriginal community. It is a completely different construct to the Western understanding of ownership bearing custodianship. For us, country and the caring of it encompasses the physical land we tread, the water we drink, we swim in, and from which we seek our food. Country is the sky, and which helps us wayfind, but also the elements of country and is the keeper of our stories from our dreaming. Country also includes the animals, like Marley, who's running amok, and nature more broadly, as well as the spirit and heart of the place. Keeping country in a state of balance keeps the people in a state of calm, balanced custodianship, and is a role for all of us to play as human beings, not just Aboriginal people. I acknowledge all elders, past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters here today, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you have come from. And to all my non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, a very warm and sincere acknowledgement to you also. May you learn as much as you can about our beautiful culture and get involved in the conversation about preserving it from whatever lands you come from today. So this is my story. This is where I turn the page. Ding! Scrub out, that's not... Healing intergenerational trauma through the reclamation and restoration of kinship connections is critical for our moving forward. Our people, Aboriginal people specifically, but really all humans, I believe, are hardwired for connection. We saw what isolation did to us during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. Imagine that isolation magnified by 1,000 times if you are an Aboriginal child taken from her mother. Imagine that isolation my father has felt being stripped of his culture since birth. Imagine what being left out feels like for an entire lifetime. It is this isolation and rejection from community that causes the greatest grief that cannot be healed. You see, my dad was born into abject poverty in the 1950s in the inner city suburb of Newtown in Sydney, just down the road. It was a time when my grandfather, who had an unhealthy relationship with both alcohol and gambling, would often drink and or lose his weekly truck driver's wage the day he was paid on a Thursday. It was a time of life where my dad and his older brother would pickpocket my pop for his wages under my nan's very strict Catholic instructions, way later in the night than a 5 and a 6-year-old little boy should be out, let alone be in a church cemetery in the middle of the city. But all means have an end, and Nan needed her eldest boys to get Pop's wages, or they, all 5 children, would have gone without food for the week. In the 1950s in Sydney, in that part of town, this part of town, the white cars or the welfare were a very real threat to poor families, let alone those that had black in them. One can only assume that neither my nan nor my pop wanted to subject their 5 kids to the collection of those white cars and be interned as wards of the state under the Aborigines Protection Act. God knows with Pop's track record, they'd likely never get them back. And so it was that being Aboriginal in our family, the Anderson family, or black, just was never mentioned. But it's not really the actual story or the whole story. While forms of traditional culture were never practiced, it wasn't as if we didn't know who we were. At Christmas, faces were black and white. We would pile into a laneway at my grandparents' housing commission house on Parramatta Road near the Stanmore Macca's, which has now got palatial apartments on it, and park cars at the end of the street. We'd have a 44-gallon drum and burn shit all night until the next day, and have multiple generations of our family in tow. A lot of our family have Aboriginal partners as well. They have Aboriginal wives, husbands, and of course black children. I thought nothing of it growing up. I never questioned it. It was never a thing until I went to high school. Perhaps I didn't even notice it, but nothing too was ever said. No one ever put a sticker on me and said, wow, you're Aboriginal, or you're not. Until one day, it was Boxing Day many years ago, my Auntie Marge, who's an Aboriginal Gamilaroi woman, married to one of my dad's younger brothers, with half an amount of joking and a lot of amount of earnest, said, you've got a whole bunch of blackfella in you too, girl, as we were talking about something funny. Look at Peanuts, which is my grandfather. See, Peanuts was the affectionate name we had for my pop, because he was a bit mad. Bonkers, Peanuts. And this was the first time anyone had given my Aboriginality a voice. Any recognition, and also a huge weight of responsibility as one of the eldest grandchildren. I have many regrets from that single moment, as it was many, many years before the passing of Peanuts and my nan, and at that point in my life, there was still so much time to understand more about where we came from and how we fit into the puzzle of life. Instead, I was terrified, confused, and quite unaccepting of what this might mean for me and my then husband and our relationship, as I knew his views on race. Also for my job, at the time I worked for an ultra-conservative radio station in Sydney, where being Aboriginal was not something you put on your CV. So instead, I dyed my hair even blonder, I stuck my head in the stand outwardly, but internally that day, Auntie Marge lit a fire in me that would never go out. I started my story with her as one of my amazing elders. My great-grandmother was part of the stolen generations. A very dark corner in Australia's DNA. It was first deployed under the guise of the protectionist policies where people, including children as young as 12, were forced to work on properties where they worked under horrific conditions and most did not even receive any wages. Then in 1937, the Australian government agreed to move towards assimilation policies. These policies aimed to integrate Aboriginal persons who were not of full blood into the white community into an effort to eliminate the Aboriginal problem. As part of this, there was an even greater increase in the number of children forcibly removed from their homes and placed with white people, either in institutions where they were trained for indentured servitude or slavery and usually abused, or interned into foster homes where a similar ritual of training, abuse and isolation ensued. The Australian shame of these policies is deep-seated. This country was built by the hands of indentured Aboriginal slave force, and these child removal practices still continue today. In any case, my great-nan Amy, for a woman born in the late 1800s, was a bloody dynamo. And she is an elder. She married a white fella, had a brood of children with him, but at least one, possibly two, maybe three of her 7 children were not her husband's. Shock horror. Percy was the son of an Aboriginal man. So one of her eldest son was the son of an Aboriginal man. The Aboriginal man who lived in her backyard. What? Yes, I hear you say, what was an Aboriginal woman in the 1920s and 1930s in Camperdown doing with a black fella and some of his kin living in her backyard? This is why I wish I had more time with Peanuts. Were they our family in the backyard? I would say so, but I can't prove that. Or were they people that were from the mission that needed a place to hide out of sight from the police while they stayed in the city? As at that time, if you were caught off the mission, you would be interned in jail. Was my great-nan under the auspices of her connection to culture and to her mob helping and protecting them when they came to Sydney by providing them a safe place to stay, eat and sleep whilst on their journey through our country? Mind you, this deed at the time would have been more than just a criminal offence. She was a woman hosting Aboriginal people in her backyard. In speaking with my dad years ago, he corroborates this story and even has photographs of the camp. He remembers the black fellas being in the backyard as late as the 1960s and possibly all the way up into the early 1970s. That's within our living memory. So within our living memory, my great-grandmother, Amy, who was stolen, has an illegal blacks camp in her backyard in Camperdown, down the road, has at least one child outside her marriage, possibly 2, maybe 3, with a black man. So it's quite clear that her Aboriginality was no secret to her white husband. But I gather it really wasn't discussed either. Also within our living memory is my pop Peanuts, a drinker, a gambler, terrified to identify in his younger years for fear it will make his family a target for the welfare cars and his children at risk of being removed. Also within our memory, our living memory, is my dad, who remembers how hard it was being so poor in the inner city of Sydney with a father mostly on the road or drunk. This is my story. This is the story given to me by my elders. I am an Aboriginal neo-contemporary artist. I am a dot painter. Painting allows me to be seen for who I am. What started as a hobby to while away long evenings of work-related stress and intense chronic pain from a broken back became my superpower. Sitting quietly for hours, meditating into my artworks, chewing through negative thoughts of disconnection, of sadness, of the longing, stoked my feminine fire and my matriarchal stoicism that I had locked up deep down inside. It allowed me for once to be real. That sounds super cliche, but it's the truth. I didn't have to wear makeup. I didn't have to wear nice clothes. I didn't even have to wear my shoes. I could simply tune into my own vibration and slowly, deeply work through the stories I knew and put them back into my heart. Painting allows me to be seen for who I am and what I am. I am a fair-skinned Aboriginal woman. I'm a mum. I'm a vulnerable, creative soul that wants to make the world a better place. But that vulnerability was too much for me at the beginning. I was only learning to embrace that sense of deep listening to my elders, to my ancestors, and to my culture. As an artist, my connection to my culture now is really powerful. And it's from this place that I can get loud. It is from this position that I can call out bullshit over what is keeping our people under the government's welfare, undereducated, under-resourced and at risk. You must first understand where fair-skinned Aboriginal people fit into the matrix of Australian culture. That is to say, we don't. That's right, we don't fit anywhere. There's no box to tick. We are an enormously large group of people. We are people who have been lied to by our families, have made up backstories, have fantasies of having darker skin because we are Italian, Fijian or Indian. That's right, nominating any sort of dark skin is A-OK in Australia, just as long as it's not Aboriginal skin. Think of the physical, emotional and psychological damage this shame has engraved on the hearts and minds of tens of thousands of people. The utter destruction of who you are every single day by stealing your power. It is from this position as an artist I get to put together exhibitions that speak to these identity challenges for me. I myself and many more people like me in feeling silenced, in feeling like we don't belong, and feeling like we're undervalued as people in a modern society. Exhibitions like Black Enough, where I first considered why or why not I should justify my ancestry and who was I going to justify it to. This was inspired by a slew of online and family conversations around the right to identify as Aboriginal and the reciprocity that is part of our time-honoured culture. You don't just show up one day and say, "G'day, I'm Aboriginal," or "I'm a black fella now." And if you did, you'd be a dickhead. My beautiful culture is a gift, and it can be difficult to navigate if you didn't begin your life in the desert, speaking your original tongue. It comes with rules, shitloads of them, and lots of obligations. You become the most responsible version of yourself when you step up and into your culture, your ancestry and your learning. It's called custodianship. The Kahlin Collection was another exhibition which was inspired by the vitriolic treatment of Aboriginal people of mixed heritage like Bruce Pascoe and Dr. Anita Heiss to diminish their persuasiveness in debate about racial issues in Australia. See, Australia has so much shame, generations of colonial shame that is tucked just out of sight. So when educated blacks start speaking up about truth, that shame comes to light. It makes people feel really uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is good. Being uncomfortable means you're having a reaction to the shame you feel. It's being brought to the surface and should, could, would be dealt with. Usually an apology and compensation, i.e., how do we make this better for you, is all that's required. But unfortunately, the maturity of our country, its politics and beliefs, still to this day, cannot extend the hand of true friendship to our people. Negative Space was another politically charged exhibition where I portrayed the absence rather than the presence of culture in my work. And Colour Correction, another body of work where I explored colour as a mistake. Imagine that for a moment. Being coloured in this country insinuates you're a mistake. It seems that to the antagonists, those that like to undermine a blackfella, any blackfella, on the basis of their skin colour, their postcode, those that like to call for DNA tests, force us to have a letter of proof for our Aboriginality and tout, he's not really black, she's not really black. The conservative media journalists and our even more conservative politicians have unwittingly created an army of young, accomplished First Nations voices. I like to think of this as black excellence. In an era where it took a black man in another country to die screaming, "I can't breathe," for Australia to start hearing, black lives do matter, which covers even fair-skinned black fellas like me, all the way to my blackest sister up in Arnhem Land. The reduction of cultural value by others is done to lessen and weaken cultural power. and cultural voice. It is done sometimes subconsciously and sometimes consciously, and it's done to rob us of our power and to shrink our black confidence so that we don't stand up, so that our voices do not disagree at the little things, the 1% things, the things that end up making a difference. Without my confidence in my culture, I'm nothing. And if I'm nothing, I'm neither black nor white. So with my eyes, heart and soul wide open, 10 years ago, I threw myself into my arts practice, into my culture, and I have been guided by so many elders to get to this point today. I research, I learn, and I listen. My connection to my culture is stronger than I could have ever anticipated. By being honest about who I am, I have been able to learn so much more. My children and I now speak our original Gadigal language, thanks to the formidable professor and elder Jackie Troy at this uni. We have strong connections to our elders and our mob. We have learnt the strength of sticking together when times are rough and the unadulterated joy of being in the presence of our elders who know our old stories and wish to share their wisdom with me and my children. I have been able to teach my children the deep listening that allows them to embed cultural knowledge that we share into the physical practice of making things with their hands. They make artifacts, they crush ochre, they paint, and they're learning our traditional dance. But above all, my honesty has allowed them to belong, to write their story. They belong to the oldest living culture on earth, and I couldn't be prouder of their custodianship and the pride they exhibit when they tell people they are Gadigal. My honesty means they will never know any differently. They are and have always been Aboriginal in the eyes of their elders. Thank you. Mm-hmm.